This screencast is the second in a series focusing on energy systems. This will primarily focus on the ATP PC Energy System, which is one of the anaerobic energy systems. Again, anaerobic meaning that oxygen is not used in the process. So to read out the slide, ATP in the muscles is broken down to produce energy. Now this energy that's produced is used for muscular contraction. The ATP is broken down into adenosine diphosphate and an inorganic phosphate releasing energy. The compound creatine phosphate, also in the muscle, is broken down into creatine and phosphate. Now the energy that's released when the creatine and phosphate split releases enough energy to rejoin the inorganic phosphate with the adenosine diphosphate to resynthesize ATP. Now the stores of creatine phosphate and ATP that are stored within the muscle will be exhausted after approximately 10 seconds of very high intensity activity. So if we look at it with respect to a diagram, if we have one adenosine and we have 3 phosphate, which is our ATP, adenosine tri meaning 3 phosphate, we have a phosphate here split off, which means that we have left an adenosine, 2 phosphates, which is adenosine diphosphate, or ADP, so di meaning 2. We have also here our inorganic phosphate, that's the one that's split off. And as well as that, we have energy. And this energy here is used for muscular contraction. Quite often we'll see it written in this form. What this means is that adenosine triphosphate will be broken down into adenosine diphosphate plus the inorganic phosphate and energy for muscular contraction. This bit here refers to the fact that it's reversible, so the process can operate in the other way as well, meaning that the inorganic phosphate can rejoin with the adenosine diphosphate to create adenosine triphosphate, and the process by which the inorganic phosphate joins with the adenosine diphosphate to recreate ATP, that's the process by which our energy systems resynthesize ATP. So the first of these, the creatine phosphate system, we have a creatine and a phosphate. Now the creatine and phosphate split, so we end up with a creatine and a phosphate and energy. Now the energy here is used to rejoin adenosine diphosphate and the inorganic phosphate. So being left with adenosine triphosphate. So that's our end result. So again, here, our creatine and phosphate split. So left the creatine and a phosphate, and the energy that's released from that split is enough to rejoin the inorganic phosphate with the adenosine diphosphate, resynthesizing 1 ATP. So if we look at it from the slide, here we'll see ATP, the process which can be working in either way. So ATP is broken down into adenosine diphosphate plus our inorganic phosphate plus energy for biological work, our muscular contraction, by which the first energy system to resynthesize it, our ATP Pc system, the creatine phosphate splits into phosphate plus creatine and the energy that's been released, which is used to resynthesize the inorganic phosphate with our adenosine diphosphate, resulting in the resynthesis of ATP. So what type of events or sports would we consider to be ATP-PC Energy System based events? I think that the easiest ones to look at could be a 100-meter sprint. It could be a 25-meter short course swim. And then probably the other ones that are the easiest to think of are our athletic field events. So things such as high jump, long jump, javelin, discus, shot put, hammer throw, pole vault, triple jump, etc. So these are maximal effort, very short duration, and continuous activities. Now, the type of sport that we would describe these as would be power sports. So again, these are very high intensity and very short duration type activities. So again, looking at this, we've got a diagram that we have already looked at. Creatine and phosphate splitting, releasing energy to resynthesize our ATP, which can then be broken down for energy for muscular contraction. So here, ATP PC Energy System corresponds to approximately 92 to 100% max heart rate. Now remembering, if we're going from percent max heart rate to beats per minute for a 20-year-old athlete, we're going to multiply by 2. So here, 92 to 100% max heart rate for a 20-year-old is going to be 184 to 200 beats per minute. Again, very high intensity or maximal power production at approximately 5 seconds. So it'll take 5 seconds for the ATP PC system to reach its peak rate of production. However, because of its very low capacity, the system won't be able to provide a meaningful amount of energy after approximately 10 seconds of continuous, very high intensity activity. Now, to replenish our stores of ATP and CP, I'm just going to, in fact, have a little aside here. We do need to know what the difference between ATP PC is and ATP and PC. The first one of these is the name of an energy system. These here are in fact two different substances. We have substances or stores of ATP, and here we have stores of PC. So one's the name of an energy system, one is the name of two different substances. If you get these confused in the exam and you write down, for example, stores of ATP-PC, you'll be marked incorrect. So it takes approximately between 2 and 6 minutes of rest to fully replenish your stores of ATP and CP. The best form of rest to replenish these stores is a passive rest. So that means you are doing very little. So if we go back to the type of activities that would be predominantly fueled by the ATP PC system, and we're going to here look at the field events: high jump, long jump, javelin, discus, shot put, hammer throw, pole vault, triple jump. After they've had one jump or one throw, they go and they sit down, maybe put a tracksuit on, but they go and sit down. They do a passive recovery in an attempt to fully replenish their ATP and PC stores before their next jump or throw. And lastly, during rest, oxygen is required to resynthesize creatine and phosphate back into creatine phosphate. So it occurs at rest, and oxygen is required. This is in fact the first part, or the fast part, of EPOC. Excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. So the reason why initially we need a greater amount of oxygen to be consumed than during rest when we're recovering is to replenish our muscular stores of creatine, phosphate, and ATP. The limitation of our ATP PC system is that we deplete it very quickly. So, limitation, the very low capacity. On the other hand, the benefit or the major advantage is its very high rate at which it can resynthesize ATP. So looking at from within the sarcomere or our myofibril, this is looking at what's going to be in the muscle before we start a max effort 100-meter sprint. So we have resting levels of ATP, glucose, creatine phosphate, and lactic acid. And you might ask, why is lactic acid present in a muscle if we're not working? Because all three energy systems work at once, there will be some lactic acid, which is lactate and hydrogen ions, being produced. However, it's certainly nowhere near a level in which it will fatigue us. So that's at the start. 5 seconds in to the 10-second max effort, when our ATP PC Energy System is at its peak, we'll see a couple of changes. There'll be less stores of ATP, so we have more adenosine diphosphate with our inorganic phosphates. We have less creatine phosphate, and we'll see that we have phosphate and creatine that's been split. We have more lactic acid, so more lactate and hydrogen ions, because as our 5 seconds works through, the anaerobic glycolysis system increases its rate of production, and therefore our glucose levels will decrease within the muscle, as that is the fuel for the anaerobic glycolysis system. At the end of the 10-second max effort, we're going to have, or we should have, no more stores of ATP nor creatine phosphate. So lots of adenosine diphosphate, lots of creatine, lots of inorganic phosphates. The anaerobic glycolysis system has again increased its rate, so there'll be more lactic acid, lactate and hydrogen ions. There'll be less glucose. And that's where we will leave the ATP PC Energy System.